The first time I used a Ouija board, I was about 6 or 7, and I was with my mom and older sister, who was about 15 at the time. We had just moved to a new house, much bigger and much older than the one we lived in previously. It was rumored that the previous owners had experienced inexplicable events, but my family dismissed it as hearsay. That night, my mom, my sister, and I were eating pizza on the living room floor since we didn't have all of our furniture set up yet. To ease the chill of the fall air, we decided to put on a fire in the old, dusty fireplace. As the fire crackled and flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls, my sister convinced our mom to let us play with the old Ouija board she had found in the attic. Reluctantly, our mom agreed, and we placed the board on the floor between us. As we started using the Ouija board, I felt a sudden, bone-chilling draft sweep through the room. We all shivered, but continued, assuming it was just a gust of wind from the old windows. The planchette began to move slowly at first, then more quickly, as if being pulled by an invisible force. The air in the room grew colder, and the fire's warmth seemed to dissipate. Suddenly, a box in the living room that had some books in it flew across the room, narrowly missing my head. We all screamed, and my mom, wide-eyed and pale, tried to rationalize the situation. Before we could process what had just happened, the fire inexplicably went out, plunging the room into darkness. We were left with only the dim glow of the moonlight filtering through the curtains. My sister, trembling with fear, suggested we leave the house immediately. Our mom, too shaken to argue, grabbed her purse and car keys. As we made our way to the door, we heard faint whispers that seemed to emanate from the walls. They grew louder and more menacing, as if angry voices were trying to keep us from leaving. My sister and I clung to our mom, our hearts pounding in our chests as we hurried out of the house. Once we were outside, we piled into the car, and our mom drove us to our grandmother's house to spend the night. The entire drive, I kept looking back at the house, certain that something sinister was watching us from the shadows. We never spoke of that night again, but it haunted my dreams for years. The memories of the cold air, the flying box, and the whispers that seemed to invade my soul are still vivid even now. Whenever someone mentions a Ouija board or shares a story of paranormal experiences, I can't help but shudder, remembering the terror of that night in our old house. If this story doesn't convince you to skip the Ouija board and opt for one of these Halloween movies for kids instead, we don't know what will. I had always been intrigued by the idea of Ouija boards, but I had never actually used one. My friend Claire had mentioned that she had one, so I asked her to pull the board out so I could check it out. At first, she hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the idea. She eventually agreed, but only if she didn't have to participate. I, being a typical teenager, didn't think much of her apprehension. We gathered around the table as Claire reluctantly set up the Ouija board. I asked, "Is there anyone in here?" There was no response, just an eerie silence that settled over the room. Feeling a mixture of annoyance and bravado, I foolishly taunted, "If anything is in here and not talking, you're a coward." The atmosphere in the room seemed to shift, becoming heavier and more oppressive. Unnerved, Claire quickly put the board away, and we moved on to other activities. Fast forward about a week later, and I found myself waking up in the middle of a stormy night. Thunder and lightning, wind and rain. It was a scene straight out of a horror movie. I glanced around my dark room, trying to discern why I had suddenly awakened, but unable to see anything out of the ordinary. Deciding it was just the storm that had disturbed my sleep, I closed my eyes and attempted to drift off again. After lying there for about 30 seconds, I heard a voice coming from downstairs. It was a raspy, wispy whisper that sent chills down my spine. "Get the boy." My eyes snapped open, and I strained to listen for any other sounds, but there was nothing. Trying to convince myself it was just my imagination, I closed my eyes and attempted to go back to sleep. Suddenly, the voice returned, louder and angrier. "Get the boy!" It was as if the words were being shouted directly into my ear. My heart raced, and I could feel the fear coursing through my body. At that very moment, the door downstairs slammed shut with such force that the entire house seemed to tremble. I bolted upright in bed, my breath coming in panicked gasps. Nobody slept downstairs, and there were no drafts that could have caused the door to slam. I couldn't shake the feeling that something sinister was at play, and I couldn't ignore the connection to the Ouija board incident from the week before. That night, I didn't sleep another wink. The following day, I confronted Claire about the board and told her about the terrifying events of the previous night. Her face paled as she admitted that she too had experienced strange occurrences since we had used the Ouija board, including unexplained noises and objects being moved or thrown. Together, we researched how to properly dispose of the Ouija board and performed a cleansing ritual on both her house and mine. Afterward, the strange incident stopped and life returned to normal. I had learned my lesson. Never again would I taunt or engage with forces I couldn't understand or control. My wife Anna and I had been experiencing some unexplained occurrences in the house we were renting. Shadows seemed to move on their own, and we would often hear strange noises late at night. We couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. So, in a desperate attempt to figure out what we were dealing with, we decided to purchase a Ouija board. It was a decision we would come to regret. The board itself was plain and unassuming, but there was an undeniable sense of foreboding that came over us when we brought it into our home. We waited until nighttime to use the board, hoping that we might be able to communicate with whatever spirit was haunting our house. We lit some candles and sat down at the dining room table, our hands trembling slightly as we placed them on the planchette. As we began to ask questions, we quickly realized that Ouija boards don't discriminate between spirits. They open the door for anything to come through and communicate. The planchette moved erratically, and the answers we received were evasive and cryptic. It became clear that we were not speaking to a friendly entity, but something far more sinister. Toward the end of our session, the planchette suddenly flew off the board, narrowly missing Anna's face. We stared at each other in shock, our hearts pounding. It seemed that our attempt to seek answers had only succeeded in angering whatever presence was in our home. After that night, things in the house went from bad to worse. Radios and TVs would turn on by themselves, often blaring at full volume in the middle of the night. Faucets would spontaneously turn on, flooding our bathroom and kitchen. We would hear disembodied voices whispering our names or even shouting at us, causing us to cower in fear. The most terrifying incident, however, occurred one night when Anna claimed I became possessed. I have no recollection of the event, but she recounted the experience in vivid detail. She said my eyes rolled back in my head, and my body convulsed as if being controlled by an unseen force. I spoke in a deep, guttural voice that was not my own, uttering threats and obscenities. Anna, terrified for both of us, began to pray. And after what felt like an eternity, I collapsed to the floor, my body once again my own. We could no longer endure the torment and decided it was time to leave the house. We broke our lease, packed our belongings, and moved as quickly as possible. We were fortunate to find a new place where we could finally feel safe and at peace. But the memories of our haunted house still haunt us to this day. We never touched a Ouija board again, and we now understand the danger of inviting unknown forces into our lives. We share our story as a warning to others. Some doors are better left unopened. As these harrowing tales come to a close, remember that the world beyond our understanding is not to be trifled with. The fear that lurks in the shadows of these Ouija horror stories serves as a warning. Some doors should never be opened. For those who dare to venture into the darkness, know that the unknown may reach back, and once it has taken hold, there is no telling what horrors might unfold. If you found these spine-chilling stories terrifying, then beware. For more, await those who dare to explore our realm of nightmares. Like and subscribe, but be warned. Each new tale will pull you deeper into the abyss, leaving you wondering what terrors might be lurking just beyond the edge of your vision. Are you brave enough to join us on this chilling journey?